So we're going to talk about 3 different folks today. And the first one we're going to talk about is a guy by the name of, I believe it's Jeffrey in this way, spelled in this way, but I'm not too sure about the spelling of his first name because all I have in my notes is Bitter. But the cool thing that I wanted to point out to you is, so behind me is a list of presentations. And this is really cool. So we're talking 1856. 1856. Okay. So this actually, Bitter, happened slightly before Einaudi and Diamandi, the guys we talked about last time. Okay. So we're in 1856, but here, instead of mainland Europe, we are in the UK. So, and then more specifically in England. Okay. So Bitter was really cool. I think it was really cool. So what we talked about in the last part was that Einaudi and Diamandi seem to have just really good techniques for how to do stuff. Okay. And in England in 1856, a guy by the name of Bitter, he was an engineer. He went to the Royal Academy of Engineers. So if you've ever heard of like the National Academy of Sciences, NAS, you see George Parker Bitter. Okay, so it's George then. Bloop, bloop. George. There we go. Thanks for that sleuthin'. All right. So he went to the Royal Academy of Engineers. He was an engineer himself. And this is like the highest level of engineers. These are you get basically inducted into the Royal Academy of Engineers once your body of work has reached great significance. So if you go and look, I'm going to point it out with my mouse just because I can't point that high on there. You will see a Mr. Geo Bitter 3 different times. This is actually the proceedings of the Royal Academy of Engineers from 1856. This is wild. This is wild. I'm so glad I found this because here you go. And essentially, it's exactly the what I'm going to tell you about, right? So mental calculation on square and cube roots. That is amazing. And this is from the Royal Academy of Engineers, 1856, 170 years ago, something like that, almost 160 something years ago. We have this. And so he gave a presentation. He wanted to tell them what he could do. Oops. I'm scrolling that. I don't want to scroll that. I want to scroll this. Okay. So, Royal Academy of Engineers. He was a stonemason's son. He learned basic numbers, and he figured out the higher numbers all by himself. In his own words, he said, quote, really got to know the first 100 or so numbers and all of their relations backwards and forwards. I mean, that's the trick for doing math in your head. Okay. As long as you understand the relationship between numbers, you can quickly do math in your head. So if I were to say, okay, what's the square root of 30? Well, if you know that the square root of 25 is 5 and the square root of 36 is 6, your perfect squares, you're going to be able to figure out, well, in my head, the answer is going to be somewhere around 5.4. Somebody can check me on that one. Square root of 30. Right? So as long as you understand how numbers are related to each other, you can do these feats. Okay? So by his teens, reputation as a super memorist. Boom. Mic drop. Yep. 5.477. You like that? Call me a super memorist, shall you? No. Don't. Reputation as a super memorist. Then he went to college, became that engineer. Go ahead, start tossing numbers out. I will probably ignore them. Okay. So in 1856, Bitter himself was 50. Okay. So he was already doing all sorts of different things, and he was getting better at it and better at it and better at it. Okay. He made it very clear that this was not capacity. So he didn't even need guys like Charcot or Binet to come by and say, "No, I don't think it's capacity. I think it's technique," as we talked about with Einaudi and Diamandi. No, he understood that these were performative memory feats, and he needed to prepare for those performances. Okay, and so he was able to explain. That's why he was granted an audience here at the RAE on his way to do these things. He explained it this way. He said he broke his number stuff and memory tricks into smaller chunks to get around his capacity limitations. And what I mean by chunks here is he broke them into steps. So what this does is it reduces the necessity of something that's capacity intensive into something that's no longer capacity intensive. It's minimal in that case. Okay. So let me give you an example. Okay. Let me give you an example. We've got 306. What can you say about 306? What is there to say about 306? Well, it's definitely a multiple of 3. Do you know why I know it's a multiple of 3? Because it ends in a 6. And any number that ends in a multiple of 3, single digit, is a multiple of 3. Okay? It's an even number, indeed. Okay? There are a lot of elaborations, is what he called it. Okay? Series of elaborations. So, what he would say is this is something like 7 squared plus 16 squared. Or the square root of 305 equals 17.46. 305 is 5 cubed plus 10 times 18. Now, that doesn't seem like anything if you haven't been messing around with his. So this seems like it's random and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, okay, it's 7 squared plus 16 squared. Why do I care? Or why do we care about the square root of 305 equaling 17.46? What does that have to do with anything? And then what is 5 cubed plus 10 times 18? What? Well, 10 times 18 is 180, right? Plus 125 is 5 cubed? 305. There you go. It's strange. Okay. Now you may be wondering, okay, well, we're talking about 306. Why are these talking about 305? Well, it's because they're right adjacent to them. So he's thinking of 306. He gets to put that off to the side. And now he can make elaborations on 305. This is essentially levels of elaboration. Remember just a couple of weeks ago, we talked about levels of elaboration. Right? So the more he elaborates on a number, the more he thinks about. You could do this too. You could do this too. So if we were going to assign, Bitter would also agree that this is all technique. I'm going to undo that. There we go. Technique theory. Next person. These next two are relatively short. We're going to call this person the runner. Now, the runner, so nicknamed because he was a cross-country runner. You can't fault scientists for not being this original. I'm just saying. Okay. This one's going to be clearly technique. Again, another technique. He increased his STM capacity from 7 plus or minus 2 to 80. $238 hours of practice. That doesn't seem like a lot, considering that the fanciful idea of expertise comes down to 10,000 hours. It's not. It's not. But 230 hours to go to increase your ability by 12? So, 12-fold? What? That's wild. I'm using 7 here, not 9. It'd only be 9-fold if we were using the upper limit of this. Okay. 12-fold. And if you get better at chunking, then this 12-fold increase, this 80 bits of information, becomes far more valuable than just 80 random things. What did he use to chunk? His experiences. That's it. Now, he only did this before you get going like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go run now. It was only digits. So don't get too caught up. Okay. So let me give you an example of something that he could do. 404, 231, 785, 9499. Now, I'm sure you could pull some things out of this set of digits, right? This is beyond the capacity that us normal plebs can handle in any one sitting, okay? But what he would do was he would chunk these. Good time for a mile. Right? You've probably heard about people talking about 4-minute miles, right? I definitely can't run a 4-minute mile. And then he would talk about how 231 is his time in high school. Half mile. And so on and so on and so on. I have to be clear about this runner, though. He only did it with numbers. And so if you tried to do this situation with him to see if he could remember 7 plus or minus 2 on like landscape images, it would not. And even the most appropriate level of comparison to digits would be letters, and he couldn't do the same thing with letters. He was not very good with letters. So this was only numbers. Still pretty cool. But along the lines of some of the folks that we talked about last time who, could remember things like, I don't know, however many digits of pi. And then it's just like, I mean, what for? Maybe you win a trophy or something like that. But honestly, what for? I don't know. So the last person I want to talk about is O. Now, O, as me grabbing this image, this is not O, obviously, because I couldn't find O. O's very hard to track down. is a woman. Okay. O. So rather than talking about digit span or things like along those lines, rather than talking about digit span, I'd like to use O to talk about visual memory. And specifically, we're going to do words. But with visual memory, we're going to mention that this was a list of 25 words repeated with no errors. One viewing. That's wild. So the interesting thing with O was that it was claimed that this was an entirely possible case, potential case of increased capacity. I mean, we've already talked about 4 different people now across these last 2 parts that were 100% technique theory. They increased their memories by just putting the time and effort into doing memory techniques like method of loci, pegword hypothesis, among other things, breaking into smaller chunks, whatever, elaboration, whatever. O, on the other hand, not quite the same. So if we recall, George Sperling studied iconic sensory memory. And he said that the way to test whether or not somebody's visual memory was good was to ask them to do these matrices, right? And so we looked at matrices that had letters in them. Okay. So we're going to do a 9-letter one. Okay. So this gets flashed 100 milliseconds or so, right? Super slow. You're told to look at the cross that's in the middle here. So, there's a crosshair in between. You're supposed to stare there, and if you were going to do the whole report method, give me all 9. Partial report, queued to give me 1 row. Right? So they actually gave O this test. In contrast to neurotypical folks, O was able to be 100% accurate over here, which is not something that we were able to show that we all could do, right? We did the demonstration and everything, and we just couldn't do it every single time. Every single time. Okay, she made some errors, but overall, she was able to report back all 9 letters after a brief flash. 50 to 100 milliseconds. The briefest of flash. Barely barely liminal. Here's the thing why this is so important of a finding. It's just a case study, so we don't know. But there's really no possible way that you can better your technique on the Sperling task. Nope. Can't do it. Because you don't have conscious access to iconic memory or visual sensory memory. You don't have conscious access to it. So thus you can't control it. And so thus you can't better it on a conscious level. O had apparently a really good sensory memory, which allowed her to make visual inferences without error. It's really cool. I think it's really cool.